Thanks everyone, and welcome to this very significant women's budget statement, which has become such a feature of what Labor does every year after the budget. I've been invited by Tanya and Sharon and the caucus to provide an acknowledgement of country, which I'm very proud to do in this caucus room, standing beside the Aboriginal Tasharanda flag, the Australian flag, and being able to perform this very ancient cultural protocol. We are on Ngambri and Ngunnawal land, and we pay our respects to the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. We pay our respects to any other Aboriginal people that are joining us this morning, but we also pay our respects to all of you fellow travellers and others that have joined the Labor caucus this morning to launch this women's budget statement. A particular acknowledgement to Tanya and to Sharon for the leadership that you've provided in relation to this. Yeah, clap. Can I just briefly say that one of the reasons I'm so proud to be able to do this as a Wiradjuri woman is to say that and to demonstrate to you through this statement how seriously Labor takes diversity, how seriously Labor takes the role and the place of women in our society and in our party. In relation to First Nations women, it has been the role of First Nations women very much to hold community, to hold culture, and to hold children closely. It has been very much the role of First Nations women through some very dark periods of our history to keep things and our people strong. It is our aunties, our sisters, our cousins, our nieces that we remind ourselves of today, and also the very important role that Aboriginal men have in the network and in the place of First Nations people in this country. On that note, I say acknowledgement of country to the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri, and congratulations once again on the wonderful leadership that we see in presenting the Women's Budget Statement.
Thank you, Linda. That acknowledgement is always as generous as always, and I want to pay a very special tribute at the outset to both Linda Burney and Malandiri McCarthy, two sisters in our caucus room who really help ensure that our policies are the very best they can be. So thank you to you both. And a huge welcome to all the women and kindred men in the room. It's always wonderful to kickstart Budget Week with a couple of hundred feminists in a room. Nothing like that to sharpen one's mind. Because we know that this Treasurer, indeed this government, tried to lock out women's groups from the 2019 budget lockup because they were apparently not relevant. Not relevant. I thought, imagine how that goes down in a room like this. We're pretty used to this government setting a low bar, but that was a pretty new low bar, even by their own standards. So we suspect that the real, honest concern about having women in that lockup was that they would be amongst the first to realise, to catch them out for having absolutely zero new measures in this budget that are for the benefit of Australian women. And but they will be caught out because that's the role of the Labor opposition, and that is the purpose of the Women's Budget Statement that we have brought down every year in opposition. That was our commitment to Australian women, that although you have a government that, under Tony Abbott's leadership, decided there was no need for a women's budget statement in Australia anymore, despite Australia once leading the world. When he was Minister for the Women, that was the double-edged sword. And to his great shame, Malcolm Turnbull also saw no reason to have a women's budget statement, and sure as hell Mr Morrison doesn't see the need either. So we're pretty used to that same old from these old blokes running the country. So Labor has continued in opposition to do the really hard work of producing a women's budget statement, and I really want to thank all of the women in the caucus room for the extraordinary efforts you've all made in helping shape some really terrific policies. Labor will go into this election with the most progressive Labor policies we've ever seen, and they are absolutely to the benefit of Australian women, our kids, our families. So you will all be very, very proud of what we're going to be able to achieve, and you'll hear much more about that. But of course it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce the woman who has led our status of women. I get to chair that amazing committee for Labor, but of course the woman who really provides the leadership there is Tanya Plibersek. And we could not ask for a more amazing Shadow Minister for Women. Hopefully soon, well, one would hope that she might actually get the opportunity to be a Minister for Women again in Australia, but she is also our Deputy Leader, and we could not ask for a more staunch feminist and strong champion for Australian women. She is at the table every day arguing the case that we're putting forward. So please join me in giving an enormously warm welcome to Tanya Plibersek.
Thanks so much, Sharon, for that welcome, and thank you so much, Linda Burney, for your acknowledgement of country. We are so very grateful that you have joined us here in Canberra, and you've made such a wonderful contribution throughout your working life, but most particularly we hope you'll be able to make that contribution as part of a Labor government, a federal Labor government. I also want to join in acknowledging the Ngunnawal people and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. I want to thank Sharon Claydon and her office very much for a whole range of reasons, but most particularly for organising this function today. As Sharon said, I've actually had the women's portfolio before, and I've gone from opposition to government with the women's portfolio before, and I remember last time we went from opposition to, we've done these sort of budget replies, they're very difficult. My staff were working through the night, a lot of shadow ministerial staff have been working since the budget to put this document together. And when we got into government last time, I was really excited because I said to the department, the Office for Women, we need a women's budget statement. Can you prepare it and can you organise the function? They said, yes, no problem. And in the discussion about organising the function, I said, oh, can you just have a little bit of music playing while people are milling around before the speeches? And I turned up, there was a string quartet, which obviously I could not justify billing taxpayers for, so it actually cost me, I don't remember how much, to pay for the string quartet. Being able to work with Sharon, who actually gets it when we say, oh, a few little nibbles would be nice, doesn't order lobster and champagne, is a great relief. I want to really emphasise the work that has gone into this. All of the shadow ministerial offices, you go into the budget lockup, there's stacks of paper, all the bad stuff's hidden. You know, the government's masters at trying to hide the real impact of the cuts they're making, the unfair decisions that they've made, and the staff are there combing through it. And we asked them from the very beginning, can you make sure you're keeping an eye out for the gender impact of these policies? And they do. They do an amazing job in drawing out these impacts over just a few days. And then poor Lauren and Rachel in my office stay up all night writing the documents, doing the layup. It is a massive effort. So thank you to all of my shadow ministerial colleagues and to their staff for drawing this document together so very quickly. If we are successful in winning the next election, this will be the most gender-balanced government that Australia has ever had. And getting to 50-50, I mean, it takes a lot of work. It takes support from the very top, and we've had that from Bill from the very beginning. But it takes hard work. It takes rule changes. It takes culture change. It takes a determined and sustained effort over years and decades. And I'm so proud of the fact that we are almost there, ahead of schedule, not because it benefits women like me who actually get into the parliament, but because of what we can do as Labor feminists for all Australian women. That's why it matters. That's why it matters, because when you have a more diverse group sitting around the decision-making table, we make better decisions for everyone. That's how equality is built. When I took on this portfolio again, I really wanted to, I had a determination to go to the next election with the most well thought out set of gender equality policies that an opposition has ever taken into government, because the truth is we have no time to waste when it comes to gender equality. I asked the Status of Women Committee under Sharon's leadership to do consultations, and they did that. They consulted with thousands of Australian women, and the results of those consultations are the policies that you see before you now. We have said that we will focus on ensuring that we have pay equity. One of the most important areas where we can deliver for Australian women is making sure that Australian men and women are paid properly for the work they do. We've seen some improvements to the gender pay gap since Labor started requiring companies to report their gender pay gaps to the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, but the progress is too slow, and we can't rely on low growth in men's wages to reduce the gender pay gap. That is what we've been doing. We'll change the Fair Work Act to make sure that the Fair Work Commission has to consider pay equity as a central objective of the workplace relations system. The point of these changes is to put in place a clear mechanism to systematically order pay increases in feminised industries and occupations that we know are undervalued. Childcare workers, disability workers, aged care workers, just to name a few. And we'll make companies, big companies, publicly reveal their gender pay gap for the first time. We'll ban pay secrecy clauses. Is it any coincidence that the finance sector, with the biggest gender pay gap, is also the industry that has the most pay secrecy clauses? It's not a coincidence, is it? We've committed to major boosts for women's superannuation, and our, I hope, future Treasurer, our Shadow Treasurer, Chris Bowen, will talk more about that in the remarks he makes shortly. The last time I was the Minister for Women, we initiated the National Plan to reduce violence against women and their children. We need to see this work to its conclusion, to really see a fall in the rates of violence against women and their children. We'll match the funding the government's put into the 4th National Plan, but we don't fool ourselves that that's enough. We don't fool ourselves that the job is done when we do that. We've announced an additional $88 million for a safe housing fund to deliver more transitional and emergency housing, including for women and their children escaping violence. We've committed to 250,000 new affordable homes, many that will benefit people who are escaping violence. We'll deliver 20,000 flexible support packages to provide practical support to people escaping violence at a cost of $60 million, and we'll have more to say in the lead up to the election. We've also announced a groundbreaking reproductive health policy. This reproductive choice policy will deliver access to safe, legal, affordable reproductive health services around the country. But it's not just the policies that we've designed to achieve gender equality that will make a difference for working women and working Australians and all women. This year, Labor's Women's Budget Statement shows the gender lens cast across all of our election policies, those that we've announced so far. Our taxation policies, our workplace policies, our investments in health and housing and education, they all work for Australian women. That's because we consider the impact of gender in our policies as we're developing them. We don't leave it as an afterthought, because equality has always been at the heart of Labor's mission. We're not releasing these policies in the shadow of an election to fix our woman problem, as the Liberals like to do. These are our core values. This year, as Sharon said, women's groups were locked out of the budget lock-up. Our approach is different, and it's not just about the budget lock-up, it's about hearing from advocates whenever we are in government on all of the policies that matter. We don't have gag clauses in our funding agreements. We want to hear constructive criticism, because that's what makes government decision-making stronger. So after 6 years of sliding down the global rankings for gender equality, I'm going to hand over to one of the blokes who is going to make sure that Australian women get their fair share. Now, I was going to hand over to Chris, but Bill's time is probably a little tighter. Chris, do you mind ceding to Bill and then... it's a loaded question, isn't it?
So I'm uncharacteristically early for once. Thank you, Tanya. I tell you, there are many good reasons to vote Labor. We just heard one of the best reasons to vote Labor, Tanya Plibersek. Thank you very much. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet. I pay my respects to elders, both past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of Sharon Clayton and the Status of Women Committee in helping produce this, along with our remarkable Tanya Plibersek and her very, very capable staff. It's exciting. We'll be in an election 5 or 6 weeks' time, whenever the current government's fingernail marks are stretched across the concrete, forced to get in the cars and go and visit the Governor-General. But whenever that is, we're ready. And we are ready, not the least, because we will be bringing to the Australian people the most comprehensive set of gender equality policies which see women get a fair go that the Australian public have ever been presented with at an election. And this is a very exciting thing. Yeah. Gender equality, the equal treatment of women, the fair go for women, that's at the heart of the Labor mission. It's what animates the members of the Parliamentary Party, our union movement, the broader community, our rank and file. We genuinely believe that if we could achieve the equal treatment of women in this country, then this would be the finest country in the world. If we accomplished nothing else as a government, if we were to be elected, but secured the equal treatment of women, we would be in a place that the world has never seen, a society where men and women are truly equal. This is a goal worth aspiring to. For me, it's a very personal proposition. My mum was a very capable woman. So when you're raised by a capable woman, it never occurs to you that women are not equal. In fact, you have this sneaky suspicion they're smarter. And you sort of spend your life trying to get over and reconcile, and maybe you're okay too. But the point about my mum is that she was the first in her family to go to university. She came from a working class family. She wanted to do law, but there was no money in the family. First to go to university, she had to take the teacher scholarship, and teaching's a great profession and she loved it all her life. But she had to make a sacrifice for the rest of the family. And her 2 younger sisters, there was no money, so they became nuns. My family and my mum was raised in a world where women had to battle, not to get ahead, but just to get an equal go. You know, this theory that that women can only advance so long as the others, that's code for men, don't get put back. Well, for the history of our country, the modern history of our country, women have always been forced to take a back seat to men. It's not a case that when we talk about gender equality, we want to do something special for women. We just want to address the imbalance, the unfairness which exists in our society. This is not political correctness. This is just about valuing us all. It's funny, campaigning with Libby Coker in Corangamite, we visited a dairy farm to announce some good policies there, but that's not for today. But the farmer was there, he was in his 60s. And I'd asked him, it was down on the Bellarine Peninsula, and I asked him, where did you go to school? And he went to Queenscliff State School, secondary school. And I asked him that because that's where my mum had taught, so I knew she had a connection down there when she finished her teaching degree. And I said, oh, did Anne McGrath ever teach you? And he said, Anne McGrath did teach me. And when you get to meet someone who knew a parent who's passed away, it's like a voice from beyond. And it's sort of, it's what you never get to do, is to hear your parent's voice again, except for someone else. And he was her student. And he said, Anne McGrath, and he called her, Annie, get your gun. And I said, why did you call her that? And he said, because she was a feminist before they were feminists. Because his mum was all for the rights of equal treatment of women too. And for me to hear that my mum had been pushing the case, and I said, what do you mean? She said, oh, well, she and my mum, this is the farmer, were always sceptics about the blokes. They never, they never took things at face value. They always insisted on their own point of view. And that's why this is personal for me. I truly believe that if my mum had had different opportunities, she could have done anything. And she did great things as a teacher, don't get me wrong. Brilliant. But I always thought, and I suspect she always thought, that maybe if circumstances had been different, by virtue of economy, by virtue of gender, if she didn't quite get the go that her abilities, if she'd been a bloke, might have seen the range of opportunities. And she was not bitter about that. It's just, it was what was. I can't go back in time and get my mum to be treated the way she should have been treated. You can't turn back the clock on history, but you can change the future. Yeah. You can change the future for everyone else. I want my daughters, I want your daughters, I want all of you. I want the women of Australia just to get an equal go. And our policies, they're not all of the answers. I understand that. We're not arrogant, we're not hubristic. There are lessons we will have to learn. There are fights that we perhaps even thought of yet, which we will have to fight. But, when I look at the work of Tanya and Penny and all of the caucus and the blokes, all of the women, this shows that we get it. We don't get all the answers. We don't have all of the solutions yet, and we haven't won all the battles. But this is a plan. When people say about modern politics that it's all just, focus group, where's the vision? People are sick of the instability. I say to you, have a look at this. We don't regard launching women's policy as an optional extra, the last paragraph in a budget. We regard a fair go for women as core business. Yeah. When you look at our policies here, superannuation, $2.6 billion extra for women over 10 years, $400 million soon. Chris and others all been driving it. Claire, we've all been driving it. Childcare. Why on earth are we still arguing about childcare? How on earth did we get to a set of events where this government has managed to take childcare off 1 in 4 families? How is it that we've got a government who doesn't want to give 3-year-olds universal kindergarten? It's a cost of living issue. How is it that we have a situation where our early childhood educators, who do crucial work, the first adults that families entrust children outside of the family unit to, and yet we devalue their work, largely, I submit to you, because it's a feminised workforce? How is it that we still have so many women facing the threat of violence, especially, but not exclusively, from people who once said they loved them? How is it they can't get some time off when they're the victims of violence just to get the bills right, sort the kids out at school, just the crucial life maintenance, which most of the men who oppose paid family leave will never have to experience. When we look at our policies and look at the recent tax changes this government's made, they've even found a way to shortchange people who earn less than $40,000 a year. Now, 57% of Australians who earn less than $40,000 a year are, guess what? Women. So we want to rectify that too. We have got a package for working women. We've got a package for women. Better protection from violence and better support when you're the victim of violence. We've got a package to support better retirement savings. We've got a package to make sure that we do something about improving the pay of low-paid workers and the tax refunds which go to low-paid workers, which are preponderantly women. We make no apologies for wanting to lift wages for millions of wage earners because that will benefit women. We make no apologies for wanting to put the penalty rates back because that affects women. So we've got a view about the fundamental fair go for women, but it doesn't stop there. Apprenticeships. We're going to pay for the upfront fees of 100,000 apprentices. We're saying half of those, there's a catch though, half of those apprenticeship places have to go to women.
Yes.
And Tanya mentioned an issue, reproductive choice policy. You know, we were talking recently, and I know what a passionate advocate she and so many Labor women have been for reform in this area, but, you know, the question I really had is why did it take so long? And I get it had to be fought for. But now it's actually been fought for, and now we've actually supported it. Like many good reforms, when you do it the morning after, people say, oh yeah, why did it take so long? And that's the art of change. You win the argument, and then the actual victory and the implementation is actually far less controversial than perhaps fears might be otherwise. But for me, it all comes back to this basic notion. Why should any of our daughters have to grow up in a world where they work for 2 months longer each year than the little boys to get equal pay? Why can't women be safe at home and on the streets? Why can't we have the idea that women can retire with better retirement savings? Why can't women have a say and control over their own health choices? It's all about a fair go, but the best way to achieve a fair go for women is to have more women in the parliament. Yeah. And that's what the Labor Party is going to do. We've got it right, but we're going to do it better. And I thank everyone who's worked on this, because we can't make it right for what's happened before. We can make it right for all those who come after us. Thank you very much.
Well, I was going to introduce Bill. Instead, I'll say the same things in thanking him. But just as I do so, I also want to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people and pay my respects to Elders past, present and emerging. And also note that here at the Women's Budget launch that we should acknowledge that Indigenous women suffer a compounding inequality. A compounding inequality through their lives. And, for example, First Nations women are 34 times more likely to be hospitalised as a result of domestic violence than non-Indigenous women. Or Indigenous women make up 34% of the female prison population and 2% of the female population as a whole, and this is not all right. The reason for having a women's budget statement is, I think, and I think you think, a truth self-evident. There's too much gender inequality in Australia and not enough progress is being made in eliminating it. It's self-evident to us, but apparently not to everybody in this building. Just as we launch the opposition's budget women's statement today, I quietly look forward to launching the government's budget women's statement in the third quarter of this year after the election of a shortened Labor government. Economic policy is about lifting living standards, and an Australian Treasurer and Australian government focused on lifting living standards have to be focused on gender inequality, and we will be in office. It's a matter of social justice, but as Bill said, it's also a matter of economics. Lifting living standards is also about eliminating gender inequality. And in the couple of remarks I'm going to make today, and briefly thanking Bill, I'm just going to touch on two issues, which both Tanya and Bill referred to briefly. One is I'm very proud of the work that Labor has done in leading the debate on the inequality for women in retirement this term. Very, very proud of it. Right now, women retire on average with a superannuation balance 40% lower than men. And that gap at the moment is $100,000. Average woman retires with $100,000 less than a man. And by the time they're 60, 34% of single women in Australia are living in poverty. And we don't, as Bill said, we don't have all the answers, but we're putting it on the agenda. We will pay superannuation in paid parental leave because a woman should not be penalised for having children. And we call superannuation universal in Australia. We all do it. I do it. We call it universal superannuation. It isn't. Our lowest paid workers don't get anything. People who earn less than $450 a month receive a superannuation guarantee of zero. We'll fix that. We'll abolish the threshold and make superannuation truly universal. And of course, the majority of those people who earn less than $450 a month are women. I just want to deal with one other matter. We have a record in Australia we should not be proud of. We are one of the very few OECD countries, very few developed countries, that has not had a female in one of our senior economic policy implementation roles. We've never had a female Secretary of the Treasury, never had a female Governor of the Reserve Bank, never had a female Chairman of APRA, never had a female Chairman of the ACCC, never had a female Chairman of ASIC. None of them. There are not many countries that can say that. I mean, countries that have generally a poorer track record of gender equality than us can at least say they've had women thinking about how to implement economic policies. So when the Treasury comes to me with shortlists for those appointments, I'm going to have one basic question. Guys, where are the women on the shortlist? Appointments can be on merit. I refuse to accept that with millions of Australians who are female, none of them are capable of doing one of those jobs. I just refuse to accept it. Now, I just want to say this about Bill. He's left, but you can tell him I said it. Our policies are important. Of course they are. You know, the details are important, policies are important. But politics is about leadership and about putting things on the agenda as well. We've got a crowded political debate. There's only so many things that we can talk about. And Prime Ministers and leaders of the opposition, by and large, decide what's in that debate. We decide what to argue about. We decide what to talk about. We decide what to make speeches about. And Bill has led the debate in so many ways. Now, domestic violence is so much more on our national agenda than it was 10 or even 5 years ago, and that's due to many people. It's due to heroes like Rosie Batty, it's due to many women and men around the country, but it's in no small part due to Bill Shorten, who from his earliest days as leader of the opposition said, I'm going to put this on the agenda. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to raise this in the national consciousness as the alternative Prime Minister. Likewise with wages growth and wages inequality. Again, there's only one reason why this is being talked about now by and large. It's not because Scott Morrison or Josh Frydenberg are talking about it. It's because we under Bill's leadership are talking about it. So leadership is about choices, not just about policy choices and resourcing choices, but about putting things on the agenda. And Bill Shorten has put gender inequality and the role of women in our society and the economy more on the agenda than any other political leader I can think of in modern Australia, and that's to his great credit. Now, we have no complacency, no hubris in our show, but I'm quietly confident that he'll be the 31st Prime Minister of Australia, and he'll lead a government for which tackling gender inequality is an important part of our governing mission, and our women's budget statement, even more in government than it has been in opposition, will be an important guide as we do so. So thank you, Sharon, and your entire team for working with Tanya and my team and the entire economics team in putting the Women's Economic Budget Statement together, as you've done every year under Tanya's leadership, and it'll play a very important part in government for us as it has in opposition. Thanks for coming today, and thank you, Sharon, for all your work and leadership, leading the women in the caucus, working with Tanya on such an important task. Thank you, Sharon.
Well, that really brings to conclusion what I'm hoping might be the last women's budget statement from opposition, but let's not be jumping ahead of ourselves by any means. There is a truly big fight to be had out there and prosecuting our case, so I don't for one moment underestimate the task ahead. I do want to say a very special shout out to every single caucus member here and those that have had to leave. I did have a bit of a smile on my face when Tanya talked about the string quartet. There certainly was no string quartet. I want to reassure you that this event is funded entirely from the personal contributions of our caucus members. So the only reason this happens is that everybody is prepared to throw in some money and enable us to have a modest morning tea and to host this event. That's the very personal belief and commitment from every single caucus member. So I wanted you to know that, and please join me in just thanking what I think you can see is such an incredibly solid leadership team. We couldn't get these policies out there with that leadership, commitment and incredible support from Bill, Tanya and Chris. We've had some tough conversations over the 6 years, but I have never doubted for one moment the heartfelt commitment of every one of those persons to trying to get the very best deal we can get for Australian women on the table. So please join me in thanking the leadership team and the official launch of our document. Thank you. And I think you should all eat the morning tea. Thank you. Caucus members, we're going to do a photo for caucus members. If you join me up here near the